I confess that I expected more. He arrived with a lot of expectations, coming from a historic Ajax team, which reached the Champions League semi-finals and won the Dutch championship with a bang. Upon arrival, the Manchester United team was good, with many interesting and varied pieces, a full plate for any good manager. But it's a shame that United got it wrong again, signing a narcissist with no idea about squad management. This is the story of Erik Ten Hag and how he destroyed Manchester United. Follow with me. The beginning was chaos. The squad was strong enough to be among the 4 in the Premier League. Anything less than that would be a shame. In the first game, they suffered their first defeat to Brighton. Okay, it was the first match, but in the next game they faced Brentford, a team in their second Premier League in a row. And what happened was unbelievable. 4-0 in the first half alone. Manchester United were crushed by a weak team in the league. From then on, one of the greatest collective delusions in the history of football began. Cristiano Ronaldo was getting in the way of United. The guy was top scorer the previous season, and the club only advanced in the Champions League knockout stage because of him. Suddenly, haters and journalists, especially in England, started a campaign that CR7 was hindering United and that without him the team would be better. Were they right? If you look at the end result, the team finishing 3rd and returning to the Champions League might seem like a good job, but what if I told you that it wasn't exactly like that? The story is different. Most journalists, including those on large channels, declared that Ten Hag was a monster of a coach and that CR7 was hindering United. Let's follow together the history of Manchester United in the 2022/2023 Premier League and Europa League. After taking those 2 beatings in the first few clashes, United stabilized and Cristiano actually went to the bench in a few games, as if the 4-0 defeat to Brentford was entirely his fault. But take a look at the guy's numbers. In a game in which the team was crushed, he had 6 shots, 3 decisive passes, helped with scoring and set pieces, and only missed 1 pass. Every other player on the team had half or less of those numbers. To say he didn't try is simply making it up. This was repeated on several occasions. Cristiano Ronaldo trying, doing his part, and the team dead on the field, with no desire to win. After the fateful game that left CR7 on the bench, United beat Liverpool 2-1, Southampton and Leicester 1-0, and Arsenal 3-1. It's easy to say that United played worse than their opponents in all those games except against Arsenal, which was crazy. In the match against Liverpool, there were simply 2 attacks that resulted in 2 goals, while the rival pressed until the end. It is worth mentioning that in this game, Ten Hag introduced Cristiano in the 86th minute. Questions began to arise. Does a player of this size deserve to be used to secure results? It was obvious he was just using the guy to pass time. Against Southampton, the team that finished last this season, it was the same thing. A goal conceded in the first half and in the second. No chance, being dominated and deserving of a draw. Against Leicester, another team relegated this season, another weak performance, holding back a goal scored in the 20th minute of the first half. And against Arsenal, despite it being 3-1, it was a balanced game, with chances for both sides, and Ronaldo came on early, in the 58th minute. The victory was built with him on the field in the second half. So far, we have had 2 defeats with Cristiano participating and trying hard, and 3 victories with the team playing poorly and winning by chance, with CR7 on the bench, because supposedly he was the problem. And in the difficult game against a strong rival, in which the team for the first time this year plays equivalent or better than the opponent, he was on the field. There is no tactical, technical, or statistical reason that proves the idea that a player would disrupt the functioning of an entire team. But let's continue. The Europa League started, and the owner of the other competition, the champions, would compete in this minor championship for the first time. With Cristiano playing in the first team, United suffered a 2-1 home defeat to Real Sociedad. Well, now it's Cristiano's fault. There's no way around it, right? He tried. He had 4 shots and United lost, playing better and having more offensive volume than Real. In the next game, United caught Sheriff and won, with a goal from him. We go back to the Premier League, and here is one of the strongest reasons for me to make this video. I have rarely seen a team so dominated in a classic without having the slightest chance of competing with the opponent. That was one of the times. Manchester City 6 and Manchester United 3. Those 3 were absurd. Ten Hag's team didn't deserve to have scored even 1 goal in the match. City played football. It was greater dominance than the 7-1 between Brazil and Germany, even though the Blues scored 4 goals in the first half instead of 5. It was one of the poorest performances I've ever seen in my life, and by chance, Cristiano Ronaldo watched this mess from the bench. He was not considered to join and, in the coach's words, it was to preserve the star and out of respect for the athlete's career. He wouldn't put CR7 in a losing game. This is such a clear contradiction that I thought it would be unanimous in the next day's programs, but it wasn't. He didn't put him on to play out of respect for the player's career. But in the game against Liverpool, he put Cristiano on in the 86th minute. Doesn't it seem worse to be dropped as a substitution with 4 minutes to go in the game against your main rival than to go into halftime after a 4-0 lead? But for Ten Hag and a gaggle of bot commenters who agreed with him, the idea never crossed their minds. The 5 players who entered? Lindelof, Fred, Marshall, Shaw, and Casemiro. The first 2 were new to the club, but the last 3 had either been in the squad for a long time or had a huge career. Why did they enter if the objective was to spare CR7 from embarrassment? Wouldn't it be better and more coherent to let the 11 players who made one of the most shameful first halves in the history of the sport finish the game? Our dear Erik doesn't respect Casemiro's career, or that statement wasn't that true. To close this match, he also said that in a 4-0 lead in the first half alone, with 15 shots against 3, what the team lacked was confidence. There was no lack of tactics, defensive consistency, intensity in marking, and so many other things that a good coach offers the team. This is the recipe for winning a match. It is not even necessary to have a coach, because there is no mistake in the game. It is all the players' fault in a result like this. They didn't have the confidence to win. There is no better analysis than that. Continuing the story, after this classic, United took on Omonia from Cyprus twice, with CR7 playing. Returning to the Premier League against Everton, he was on the bench, and against Newcastle he was again in the starting lineup. Here it's worth saying that he didn't play at all. There was no finishing, great plays, passes. It was well below par, and the game ended up tied 0-0 with United playing worse. The next game was the fateful one to strain the coach's relationship with the player. A 2-0 victory against Tottenham. The reason? Once again, Ten Hag left CR7 on the bench in an important game and called him in with 3 minutes left in the game. Of course, a guy his size got angry. He refused to go in and even left the pitch before the final whistle. I disagree with this last part, but refusing to enter would be the most correct option possible in response to the coach's clear provocation. There is no other option than it would be disrespectful and humiliating to want to put the greatest player in the history of the sport, physically and technically, to walk 3 minutes on the field and waste time in a game already 2-0. After this episode, he was removed from the next match against Chelsea, but returned in the sequence against Sheriff in the Europa League. However, the atmosphere was no longer the same, and even though he played the following matches, the relationship between Cristiano and the club, not just with the coach, was already completely broken. This is because the club and some players sided with Ten Hag. After the World Cup break, Cristiano gave an interview saying that the club had stopped in time, that he didn't respect Erik Ten Hag because he wasn't respected either, and that he was betrayed by the club. He said that many didn't want him there, and that he was undermined by the board and coaching staff for missing the first pre-season training sessions. The reason? CR7, at the time, had one of his 7-month-old daughters hospitalized with bronchitis. Could any fan or journalist, regardless of whether they like the player or not, find it plausible to remove an athlete in this situation? And worse, what results, tactical or technical, did Ten Hag's team show to justify this decision? I answer you, absolutely none. Now, without CR7, Erik's team began to show more clearly how he destroyed a squad ready for titles. Manchester United were lucky to face Barcelona, who were in a terrible moment. The Catalan team scored just 8 points in the Champions Group stage, while Real Madrid scored 13.5 more than their group. If they had fallen into any other group, Barcelona would certainly be another third-place team and United's rival in the Europa League. Real Sociedad were in United's group and scored more points than group leader Barcelona. In the round of 16, the draw was generous and brought a weaker Sevilla in many years. In the Premier League, United finished third, but 5 points behind fourth place. It was the first time in history that the top 4 finished with exactly 5 points between them. The team's performance was so random that, out of 11 defeats, they suffered 5 to the 3 worst teams of the season. Have you ever seen something similar? Ten Hag's United managed to lose 2 games to Brighton, who came 6th, 2 games to Newcastle, who came 4th, and 3 games to Liverpool, Manchester City, and Arsenal, the top 3. A coach fighting for the title cannot lose so many matches to teams worse than his. He has to win 100% of his games against the worst teams and fight on equal terms with his direct opponents. But how do Ten Hag's United manage to lose 4 out of a possible 6 points to Southampton and West Ham, who came last and 14th respectively? With a complete squad and the biggest investment in the league, Manchester United has to fight for the title until the end. But just to give you an idea, against Manchester City, the aggregate score was 7-4, including the 6-3 in the first round and a slim victory in the second round by 2-1. Arsenal scored 5-4 and Liverpool, they scored 7-0. You don't need to be a football genius to know that a team fighting for the title of champion doesn't concede 7-0 against a direct opponent. After this humiliation for Liverpool, it is clear that Erik Ten Hag had no control over the team. It is unacceptable for Manchester United to lose 7-0 to any team, especially to a historic rival. This match was a reflection of the coach's poor squad management and tactics. Furthermore, we will highlight other moments that highlight Ten Hag's failure to transform a promising team into a title machine. Ten Hag began the season with a rotation philosophy that looked promising but soon proved ineffective. At various times during the season, we saw key players overloaded and others without adequate game rhythm. The insistence on certain players and the lack of opportunities for others created an environment of dissatisfaction. This was evident in situations like that of Cristiano Ronaldo, where the coach's personal management was, to say the least, disastrous. The history of games against smaller teams already highlights tactical fragility, but it is in big games that Ten Hag's incompetence shows itself most clearly. In addition to games against Manchester City and Liverpool, Ten Hag's United performed poorly against other major European clubs. In international competitions, even with accessible opponents, inconsistency was the hallmark. The elimination against Sevilla, who in other times would have been a beatable opponent, highlighted the coach's inability to prepare the team for decisive moments. The transfer market was also an area where Ten Hag failed. He brought in some players, like Antony and Lisandro Martinez, who he already knew from Ajax, but who were unable to replicate the same success in the Premier League. Furthermore, there was a lack of clear planning and hiring. The team needed reinforcements in specific positions, but the acquisitions were not assertive. Often, players who could make a difference were left out of plans or were misused. Ten Hag's relationship with the media and fans also deteriorated quickly. Controversial statements, inconsistent justifications for defeats, and the way he dealt with criticism only worsened his image. Instead of taking responsibility, Ten Hag often blamed external factors or the players themselves, which undermined trust and respect within the club. When we compare Manchester United's performance under Solskjaer with that under Ten Hag, it is clear that there has been a setback. Solskjaer, despite his limitations, managed to take United to a Europa League final and kept the team competitive in the Premier League. With Ten Hag, we saw a team without an identity, which depended on individual moments and not on solid collective work. With Ten Hag at the helm, Manchester United's future looks uncertain. The team needs a revolution, but not the one the Dutch coach promised. A coach is needed who understands the club's greatness, knows how to deal with stars, and has the tactical ability to take United back to the top. If the board continues to insist on a failed project, the tendency is for the team to continue causing embarrassment and disappointing its passionate fans. To rebuild Manchester United, a change in management philosophy is essential, starting with choosing a coach who respects the club's history and knows how to maximize the squad's potential. Until then, we will see United fight for average positions, far from the protagonism that their rich history demands. The Ten Hag era is a clear example of how a coach can destroy a promising team. It is necessary to learn from these mistakes and ensure that the club's next step is towards glory and not once again towards mediocrity.